Road to Perdition is a mafia drama about the relationship between father and son. The main character, Michael Sullivan, is a mafia enforcer for the Irish-American mafia crime boss, John Rooney. Michael was determined to keep his job a secret away from his two sons, Peter and Michael Jr. Unfortunately, the oldest, who is Michael Jr., got too curious about his father's occupation. One day, he snuck into his father's car, and he saw exactly what his father does. Once that happens, his father begged his son not to tell anybody, even though he promises the mob was not willing to risk anything. So, unfortunately, they did the unthinkable, which forced Michael and his son Michael Jr. to leave their hometown in Illinois and flee to Chicago. The rest of the movie focuses on the relationship between father and son. Now, what do I like about this movie? Well, there's a few things that I should say about this movie. One, it is set in 1931. The Great Depression was at its height, and Prohibition was almost over. So this is set in the Prohibition era and the Great Depression. So it's a pretty cool timeline. So for those who are into the mob, this might be your flick. This might be your good choice of movies. The costumes were convincing. You can't go bad with the long mafia overcoats, the long and the fedoras and the Tommy guns. Just how everything was filmed. You felt like you were in the late 20s, early 1930s. You felt like you were in the movie. That's how I felt when I personally saw this movie. Every time I watch a movie that's set, like, in the, a film that's set in the 80s is one thing, but a film that's set 50 years earlier than the 80s, like the Great Depression, the 1930s, the 20s, even the 1800s, I just watch those and I'm like, wow, how could they afford to get all of those cars, the lighters, everything that was accurate for 1931. I was just so blown away when I saw how well they got, the settings, the fashion, and it was just amazing to see how they were able to portray that in a film that was released 70 years after the Great Depression. The acting, you can't get wrong. You can't get wrong with any of the choices of the actors you got in this movie. Tom Hanks, Daniel Craig, Jude Law, Paul Newman, Stanley Tucci. You got the best of the best in here, man. Michael Sullivan Sr. is played by Tom Hanks. John Rooney, Michael's boss, is played by Paul Newman. And the two villains in the movie are played by Daniel Craig and Jude Law. And Frank Nitti is played by Stanley Tucci. Speaking of Frank Nitti, this movie features some real-life characters. It's some real-life characters in a fictional story. So they do mention Al Capone. He's not in the movie. Frank Nitti, which is pretty cool. Also, if you're a fan of William Shakespeare tragedies, this movie might be your go as well. That's the thing. I'm a Shakespeare fan, and I love William Shakespeare's tragedies, and this movie really does remind me of his work. Road to Perdition, personally, is one of my all-time favorite movies. I saw it once when I was in high school, and I was mesmerized. And I am a fan of the mafia genre, so yeah, why not? Give it a shot, But this movie does have a sad tone, so you're going to expect to cry for a bit watching this movie. It is a tear-triggering movie, so get some tissues handy for you. Not that it's a bad movie, it's a good one, but it is very sad. I will say this movie is definitely 10 out of 10 rainbows because of just how everything was depicted, everything was well acted, good storyline, good screenplay, and you really get the feeling of the realism of the show. So that's the end of that. Tune in for the next video on a new film, or any film. Mr. Blue's here for you.